Every summer, somewhere in the English countryside, a farmer walks out at dawn and finds his field transformed overnight. Stalks of wheat or barley lie pressed flat in sweeping curves, perfect rings, and shapes so precise they look drawn with a compass rather than trampled by hand. For decades, these crop circles have been dismissed as pranks, praised as art, or whispered about as evidence of something far stranger. But a recent independent research effort, built around machine learning image analysis, has reignited the debate. Engineers experimenting with pattern recognition software fed it a massive archive of crop circle photographs spanning 50 years, complete with dates, locations, weather records, and soil data. The goal was simple curiosity. Could a machine trained to spot patterns humans overlook find something meaningful hiding inside decades of flattened wheat? What it returned was not a message from beyond the stars. It was something almost more unsettling, a slow, steady climb in complexity, size, and mathematical precision, year after year, as if whoever or whatever was behind the phenomenon had been quietly refining a craft. Before we can understand what the analysis found, we need to go back to where this mystery truly began. Long before anyone used the phrase crop circle, strange markings in fields were already being blamed on forces beyond nature. In 1678, a small English pamphlet told the tale of a farmer in Hertfordshire who argued with a laborer over the price of mowing his oat field. Furious, the farmer declared he'd rather have the devil himself cut his crop. The next morning, the field had been sheared in a tight, deliberate pattern that no one could explain, and the story spread as proof that something supernatural had visited the land. It's the earliest recorded ancestor of what we now call a crop circle, even if the illustration accompanying it shows a horned figure with a scythe rather than a geometric ring. 2 centuries later, in 1880, a scientist named John Rand Capron documented something far more grounded. After a violent storm swept through Surrey, he found circular patches of flattened wheat, some with stalks curling inward, others swirling around the edges. Capron didn't reach for folklore. He proposed that spinning columns of wind, similar to small tornadoes, had twisted through the crop during the storm. It was a rational explanation for a simple pattern, and for nearly a century, that was largely how isolated flattened patches were understood. Freak weather, nothing more. Then came Tully, Australia, in 1966. A farmer reported watching a strange gray, saucer-shaped object lift out of a swamp and vanish into the sky. Where it had allegedly hovered, he found a mat of reeds pressed into a rough circle, tightly woven enough to support a person's weight. The press descended. Tourists trampled the surrounding farmland hoping to see another craft, and the Tully saucer nest became a sensation. Scientists floated theories involving wind vortices or water spouts, but no one could rule out the more exotic explanation with total confidence. And that uncertainty planted an idea in the public imagination that would define everything that followed. Circles in vegetation might be evidence of something landing. By the late 1970s, that idea had crossed into the wheat fields of southern England. The earliest circles there were unremarkable, single flattened discs, sometimes with a faint ring around them, easily explained by wind, animals, or a bored teenager with a plank. But by the end of the following decade, something had clearly changed. Formations grew additional rings. Small satellite circles appeared at precise intervals around a larger one. Straight connecting paths linked separate elements into a single composition. Triangles, crescents, and long tapering tails began stretching across entire fields, and researchers started calling these sprawling multi-part designs pictograms because they no longer resembled random damage. They resembled deliberate pictures. The formation at Alton Barns in Wiltshire became one of the most photographed examples, a long central spine flanked by circles and rings, radiating outward like a diagram from an engineering textbook. But it was in August 1991, near Cambridge, that the mystery took its strangest turn yet. A formation appeared in the unmistakable outline of the Mandelbrot set, one of the most recognizable images in modern mathematics, a fractal shape built from a repeating equation, with a bulbous main body and infinitely detailed edges. A twisting wind could conceivably flatten a rough circle. It could not replicate a specific, named mathematical structure with recognizable accuracy. Whoever or whatever made that formation understood exactly what a Mandelbrot set looked like and somehow reproduced it at a scale of hundreds of feet, viewable only from directly above. 5 years later, in July 1996, a formation appeared directly across the road from Stonehenge, a sweeping spiral built from 151 individual circles, growing steadily larger as the curve opened outward, stretching more than 900 feet. Researchers recognized it as an approximation of a Julia set, another fractal structure related to the Mandelbrot set. Viewed from the ground, it was just scattered circles surrounded by standing wheat. From the air, it resolved into a single, mathematically coherent spiral, positioned beside one of the most ancient monuments on Earth. By 2001, a formation at Milk Hill in Wiltshire had grown to nearly 900 feet across, 6 curling arms built from shrinking chains of circles, radiating outward like a turning wheel. Hundreds of individual elements had to align with near-perfect symmetry. Whatever was creating these designs was no longer just pressing down grass. It was executing complex geometry across an area the size of several football fields, in darkness, without ever seeing the finished result from above. In September 1991, 2 English painters in their 60s, Doug Bower and Dave Chorley, stood in front of television cameras and claimed responsibility for creating crop circles across southern England for roughly 13 years. Bower said the idea had come from the Tully saucer nest story decades earlier. He'd wondered what would happen if he and a friend made people believe a flying saucer had touched down in a British field. Their tools were almost comically basic: a stake, a length of rope to mark a circle's radius, and a plank of wood to flatten the crop as they walked. For straight lines, Bower rigged a loop of wire to the brim of a baseball cap, using it like a makeshift gun sight to walk toward a distant landmark without drifting off course. They entered fields using existing tractor tracks to avoid leaving a visible trail and worked entirely at night. To prove their method, they built a new formation for a newspaper while a respected researcher examined the site without knowing who had made it, and confidently declared it the work of an intelligence beyond human capability. When Bower and Chorley were introduced moments later, the researchers' certainty collapsed in real time. It was a powerful demonstration that a formation could look inexplicable and still have a mundane, human origin. But the confession didn't end the phenomenon. It accelerated a kind of underground competition. The following year, in July 1992, 12 teams gathered in a Buckinghamshire wheat field for an organized crop circle-making contest, each given identical blueprints involving multiple rings and directional changes in the lay of the crop. Working through a single rainy, moonless night while organizers patrolled with night vision equipment, 11 of the 12 teams successfully recreated the design. The winning team, 3 young engineers, used a length of plastic pipe threaded with rope as a makeshift roller and a plank bridged between stepladders to move through the crop without leaving footprints. It proved, decisively, that clean edges, sharp directional changes, and complex ring structures were all achievable with equipment that fit in the trunk of a car. If skilled human teams could explain the geometry, some formations still seemed to carry something closer to information. In May 2008, near Barbury Castle in Wiltshire, a spiral formation notched with a series of small gaps caught the attention of an astrophysicist who noticed the spacing wasn't random. Arranged around 10 segments, it traced out the digits of pi with remarkable accuracy. It wasn't an ambiguous shape open to interpretation. The numbers matched, in order, for dozens of digits. Then there was the strange echo of a real scientific transmission. In 1974, the Arecibo radio telescope beamed a structured binary message toward a distant star cluster, encoding basic information about humanity, our biology, and our solar system. A symbolic introduction sent 25,000 light-years into space, with no realistic chance of a reply within any human lifetime. In August 2001, a formation appeared beside the Chilbolton Radio Observatory in Hampshire, replicating the exact grid dimensions of the Arecibo message, but altering key details: a different figure, modified DNA structure, an added element, and a different depiction of the transmitting instrument. It read almost like a reply, delivered in the same format humanity had used to introduce itself. Except the math made an actual reply from that star cluster physically impossible so soon after the original signal was sent. A year later, another Hampshire formation depicted the face of a large-eyed figure beside a disk covered in encoded binary blocks, which researchers translated into an English-language message warning of deception and urging hope. Striking as these formations were, all of them borrowed heavily from imagery already familiar to anyone who followed science fiction and UFO folklore. Evidence, perhaps, less of contact from elsewhere and more of increasingly literate, symbolically minded human designers. Some of the most debated evidence never came from the air at all. It came from inside the stalks. Investigators occasionally found that plants within formations had bent cleanly at their nodes, without snapping, and some nodes showed tiny, unexplained holes. A researcher named William Levengood spent years comparing samples from formations against unaffected plants nearby, reporting elongated nodes, altered seeds, and structural changes consistent, he argued, with a brief burst of heat, as if the plants had been gently cooked from within, softening them enough to bend without breaking. His team also occasionally reported tiny fused, iron-rich particles at certain sites, hinting at some unidentified energetic process. But the science never closed the loop. Samples were almost always collected well after a formation was discovered, with no way to know exactly when the plants had been flattened or what had happened to them in the meantime. Cereal crops are naturally flexible, especially when young or damp, and a plant lying flat will keep growing and curving toward the light for days afterward, altering its own node structure long after the initial event. A team of Italian physicists later published a detailed critique arguing that similar measurements had turned up in formations already confirmed to be human-made, meaning the changes couldn't reliably distinguish a mysterious cause from an ordinary one. The debate was never fully resolved, not because the evidence was fabricated, but because no one had ever watched a formation being made in real time with instruments in place, so cause and effect could never be cleanly separated from coincidence. Perhaps the strangest pattern isn't in the shapes themselves, but in where they keep appearing. A striking majority of England's crop circles cluster in Wiltshire and neighboring Hampshire, a region already steeped in ancient mystery. Stonehenge anchors one of Europe's densest concentrations of prehistoric monuments, alongside the massive stone ring at Avebury and Silbury Hill, the largest human-made mound on the continent. Decades before crop circles became a phenomenon, the nearby town of Warminster was already famous for reported strange lights and unexplained sounds in the sky, drawing UFO watchers to its hills through the 1960s. When circles began appearing in Wiltshire's fields, they landed in a place already primed to interpret them as otherworldly. The landscape itself is practical, too. Wide, open cereal fields crossed by tractor lines give designers an easy, trackless route in and out under cover of darkness, while the surrounding hills offer natural vantage points for the photographs that turn a formation into a sensation. The cost is real. Across just a handful of recent years, dozens of recorded formations in England damaged the equivalent of dozens of football fields worth of farmland, worth tens of thousands of pounds in lost crops, yet arrests remain almost non-existent. Formations appear overnight and their makers vanish long before sunrise, and most farmers see little value in reporting damage that will likely never be solved. The rare exception, a maker caught only because he wanted credit, proves the rule. The phenomenon thrives precisely because its authors stay anonymous. Strip away the folklore, and the pattern recognition project's real finding is almost more interesting than an alien signal would have been. It found that crop circles, across 5 decades, behave less like isolated pranks and more like an evolving craft, a community of increasingly skilled designers building on each other's techniques, borrowing from mathematics, astronomy, and pop culture, competing quietly to outdo what came before. Simple circles gave way to fractals. Fractals gave way to encoded messages. Encoded messages gave way to portraiture. There is no evidence of extraterrestrial authorship, and every technique demonstrated in these formations has been replicated by human teams working with rope, planks, and careful surveying under cover of darkness. What the data actually shows is a very human story. Given a blank canvas, a night, and an audience eager to believe, People will keep pushing the boundaries of what a flattened field can say. Whether that's less magical than a message from the stars is, in the end, up to you to decide.